So let's see what's going on. Okay. So, all right, the stream works as of right now. I'm only using 12% of my CPU. Worked real hard on getting stuff faster. If it starts lagging, let me know. But I think this might wind up being better. All right, I'll just use real big drawings, and then I will use a bunch of them. All right. How many of you feel pretty confident about like resistors in series? Okay. Like we're about to do some math that if you didn't have the little playing around with the proportionality, it would be kind of hard to start with for some of you, okay? But just know that what we've learned so far holds across the whole thing. And it makes sense if you think about it, that if you've got a lot of restriction, right, and you're trying to push a lot of stuff through there, you're going to get pressure across that restriction, right? And that pressure is like it's a potential energy source, okay? So we could tap off of that. All right, imagine the water tower, right? We've got a whole bunch of water up there, and we've got some big old huge pipe, okay? And then it goes down and it breaks down into, smaller pipe that go across, your neighborhood. And then it breaks off into smaller pipe that go into your house, right? Now, can we get the same amount of pressure out of our house that we could maybe up top, like right before they go down? Like we could put hydrants up there, right? We put hydrants on, the big pipe, and the less resistive pipe, right? Because we've got all this pressure like built up over on our side, and by the time it gets to our house and we turn the water on, what happens? It goes from, whatever pressure's left to nothing by the time it hits the ground, right? Okay. So that logical aspect holds, okay? But we need to start taking into consideration. We'll have to get somebody been playing with I like syrup right there because it makes things look smooth. All right, so we've got to know Ohm's law. All right, this is where the rubber meets the road. Okay, voltage equals current times resistance. Or what would resistance equal? Voltage divided by current. Okay, y'all can see that, can't you? All right, let me turn off the light a little bit. Is that better? Y'all ain't gonna go to sleep on me? All right, so one of the issues people who've had me before had was, okay, well, we need two things to figure out the third. And usually that holds, okay? Like, if you're looking for resistance, you need a voltage and a current, all right? Well, what we were doing with the proportionality was we were letting you choose one of the variables, right? You could make that bottom resistor anything you wanted to, and then you would just make the top one something to counteract that, right? Cool. So, let's see how quickly we can do this. All right, we've got 20 volts right there. We've got 20 ohms and 20 ohms. Okay, I want y'all to figure out the current that's going through there, and then the voltage that's going to come out of that that leg right there. Y'all did that real quick. And make sure. Well, we heard me talking on the stream. I'll figure out how to zoom without it taking up so much bandwidth and messing us up. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind, remind me what R is, because I remember what it is once.
R is resistance and I is current. Yeah. All right. So you'll take your total voltage divided by your total resistance, which would be what? Well, almost. What's our total resistance? 40. All right, so we'll take 20 volts and we'll divide 40 ohms. Now, a lot of math teachers will say you got to put your units, right? And they'll count off for units, correct? And they won't ever tell you why. I'm going to count off for units from this point forward. Like, put a V there for voltage, put a omega there for resistance. It's not because I want to just randomly count things off. It's because it's going to help you when you start getting big equations and you're trying to, like, you're looking for a current and then all of a sudden you give me a voltage. Well, if you keep track of what you're dividing by or what you're doing, then it'll help you. What's a volt divided by an ohm? A resistance, a current, right? So if I start doing a bunch of math and then all of a sudden I give a voltage as an answer right here, I should be able to look at that volt over ohm and say, I already had a voltage. I don't need that voltage, right? I need whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to count off for that, but for your benefit. Okay, it's not because I want you to write extra, but if you just put 20 divided by 40, it's going to be hard to remember what you're actually going for. Okay. All right. So what does that equal? Yes. So we've got half an amp going through there. All right. So we'll denote the amperage by a little, arrow swooping from the negative to the positive, and we'll put half an amp. All right, now here's a magical thing. That same half amp is going through both those resistors. We can find what the voltage drop across each resistor is by what? It's a voltage, so we multiply resistance times current, right? All right, so total voltage drop would be that 20 volts, right? If we go through 40 ohms, like right now, it's going to be 20 volts. So what's the voltage drop just around this? Yep. So multiply 20 times 0.5 amps. And see, I've got volt times an amp. So, see, I would have messed up right there, right? It wasn't the 20 volts that I was caring about. It was the 20 ohms. So 20 ohms times half an amp, 10 volts. And that would be the same for the next resistor. So One resistor is dropping 10 volts, the next resistor is dropping the other 10 volts. Cool. Okay. Are y'all able to see those? Is that all right? Like, I'll get up there and try to zoom in. But as soon as I zoom in, then they'll stop acting stupid, and then it'll be way too big. But we'll deal with it. On the video, on the stream, it should be pretty big, right? And if you ever have problems looking up here or whatever, you could probably pull it up. But it'll probably drive you nuts because there's like a minute delay between when I say it and when it comes out there. All right, so with the proportionality, you could look at this and go, okay, well, I've got two of the same things. So they're going to drop the same amount, right? Well, whenever I do the math, I see that 10 volts, I drop the same 10 volts, that equals a 20. So now you should be able to look at that and go, that sounds like a right answer. Okay. All right. Now, let's look at parallel. Okay. I've been practicing trying to draw for y'all. It'll never be great, but you know, it is what it is. It looks better than it did. All right, so let's put that 20 volts right there. Okay. All right, let's put 100 ohms right here. Let's put 200 ohms right here. Let's put what in the world? 400 ohms right here. Okay. All right. Now, what's the voltage drop across that 100? On one side of that 100, there's a 20 volt, and the other side of the 100 is a 0 volt, right? Y'all see that? So when you're in parallel, your voltage drops are going to be the same. When you're in series, they're proportional to whatever that resistance is, right? But when you're in parallel, all of those resistors are touching the same two voltages, right? One's going to be, you know, let's say 20 volts, and the other side's going to be 0 volts. So even though they're different resistors, they're dropping 20 volts across them, aren't they? Like up here, like everything's touching 20 volts, and down here, everything's touching 0 volts. Okay? So I want you to digest that for a second. I want you to take a deep breath. Go. Breathe it in. Like, don't breathe in your partner's, like, people next to you's COVID, but just breathe in the information. Go, that makes sense to me. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, when we're in series, when we have a resistor and another resistor, we might have 20 volts up here, 0 volts down here. We don't know what that middle voltage is until we start doing some math, right? And that's what we've been doing, is the proportional side of things, okay? Now, proportionality still holds here, but where we're going to have the same voltage, we're going to have a different current going through there, aren't we? Right? Cool. All right. So, what's my voltage drop across my 100 ohm resistor? 20 volts. What's my voltage drop across that 200 ohm resistor? 20 volts. What's my voltage drop across that 400 ohm resistor? 20 volts. Okay. Now, we can find the total current that's going through there by putting all those resistors together and finding what that total resistance is, right? Or we could add them up, right? Because if I've got 20 volts going through 100 ohms, so I've got 20 volts going through 100 ohms. What's my current going through that 100 ohm resistor? What is it? 20 divided by 100, so you're close. It's 1/5 of an amp, right? Correct?
20 divided by 100 is 0.2.
0.2, which is 1/5 of an amp. So 0.2 amps. All right, 20 volts going across 200 ohms. Point one. And it makes sense. If I had the same voltage going through a double the amount of resistance, I have a 0.1 amp. Before y'all doing the math, what do y'all think the 400 is going to be? 0.05? Let's see if that's true. Just based off of, we're doubling the resistance again. We're probably half in the... What'd y'all get? 0.05? All right. Now, see? It keeps me honest, and it keeps me, like, putting those units make me so I go, well, I'll put a V up there. That's not right. Or I'm going to give you a hint. When I ask you a big, long question, and I'm like, what's the current going through here? The first thing you should do in the answer blank is put a little A there. So you know that if you get a voltage by the time you do all this math, I was looking for an amperage. I need to keep going, or I messed up somewhere. Okay? So if I ask for a current, go ahead and get half a point by putting an A there. Go through. He's asking for a voltage. I'm going to put a V there. He's asking for a resistance. I'm going to put the little omega sign. And that's going to keep you on track so that you know what the finish line is. Okay? All right, so what's my total current that's coming out of my source? It would be 0.2 plus 0.1, which would be a 0.3 plus 0.05, so 0.35, right? All right, now, I don't know why this does that. All right, so 0.35 amps is my total amperage. All right, now we're going to go back and we're going to prove. Y'all know when we talked about like resistors in parallel, what do we know about the total resistance of that network? Like those three resistors. All right, the 100 ohm, let's say, is a pretty big pipe. And then we've got a 200 ohm, which is half that size, and then a 400 ohm, which is half that size, right? That means that it's easier to get through those three than just the 100 ohm by itself, right? So we know that our total resistance that network is seeing when we've got three resistors in parallel is going to be below that 100 ohms, right? And it makes sense. Like, now, let's prove that we're right. We've got a voltage and we've got a current, don't we? We've got a total voltage and we've got a total current. So let's go ahead and figure out what that total resistance would be even before we start doing the funky 1 over 1 over R, 1 over R, 1 over R, okay? All right, so if we've got a voltage, we've got a 20 volts, and we've got an amperage, right? E over IR, so voltage up top, current down here. So 0.35. Somebody do that 20 divided by 0.35. You said 57.1? Okay. So we've got a 57.1 some change on total resistance. Okay, let's prove that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to show you the form of getting resistors. We got 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. And you can do that for a million resistors. You just keep adding all those resistors up. Okay. Now what this does, so, you know, if you missed it whenever we were talking about it, because I don't know that it got on video, 1 over resistance is conductance. Okay. So what we're doing when we're adding them with the 1 over R plus 1 over R plus 1 over R is we're adding all of their conductances together. We're saying how easy is it for things to get through, okay? And then we've got that 1 on top of everything that flips it back into a resistance, okay? Cool. All right, so you could go 1 divided by 100 and then get that answer. And then you could go 1 divided by 200 and get that answer. Then you could go 1 divided by 400 and get that answer. And then add all those things up, okay? And then write down that answer and then do 1 divided by that answer. That is a pain, okay? So that's why I was trying to teach y'all to use the inverse button, which looks like that, or it might look like this, okay? Like it's going to look like one of those two things on there. All right. Now, Apple doesn't have a calculator on the iPad. Did y'all know that? Like they don't have a native because they don't think it'd be elegant enough. That's what their total thing was about not putting a calculator app on the iPad. But I guess it's elegant enough for the iPhone. All right. So I'm going to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the first resistance. I'm going to do 100, okay? All right, so if you flip it over on there, you're going to get a bunch of extra stuff, all right? So I'm going to put 100 in there. And then I'm going to push that 1 over X button, and it's going to give me a 0.01, right? Cool. It's already got that in there. So I didn't have to go 1 divided by 100. I just put in 100 and then did the 1 over X button, right? The wonderful thing is I can just go in and keep adding those. So I go 100 inverse plus 200 inverse, which is 0.005, right? Plus 400 inverse. I'm going to push equal, and that's going to give me a 0.0175. That saved me from having to go and do 1 divided by and then writing down that answer, and then 1 divided by and writing down that answer, and then 1 divided by writing that down, and then going and typing all those back in. That gives me a lot of room for error, doesn't it? All right, so when you get to that 0.0175, that is your total conductance. All right, I want to flip it. Now, if you do the 1 divided by, you're going to have to write this down and go do 1 divided by, right? Or I can just push that 1 over X right there and get that 57.1428, right? All right, so when you have a bunch of things, when you're dividing, have you ever divided by something you're like, that's not right. I should have divided that number by the other number instead of the other way around, right? Push that inverse thing and it's going to give you the right answer. Cool. All right. So that's one of the most powerful buttons on that calculator. It blew my mind because we had a thing that had like 40 something resistors on it, right? That we had to, and the guy who taught me in my 2-year taught me that, and it took people, 20 minutes to get that question. I'm like, in 4 or 5 minutes, I got it, right? Everybody cool with resistors in parallel are going to share the same voltage drop, right? But then they're going to make up for it by the amount of current that's going through there. That first one's going to have double the current that second one's going to have. That second one's going to have double the current the fourth one has, or the 400 one has, right? Cool. When things are in series, they share the same current. And then their voltage drop changes proportional to their resistance, right? When things are in parallel, their voltages stay the same and they disperse the current through them inversely proportional to their resistance, okay? That just means that the higher the resistance, the less the current's going to go through, right? As that goes up, the current's going to go down. Cool? Cool. Nothing here is hard. Like, if you have issues, let me know. But we can do, just a whole lot with that. Yes, ma'am. Were you asking? Oh, okay. All right. So let's get a little fun. All right. I want y'all to do this. All right, so why does it do that? That kills me. Like, for some reason, things are getting squirrely on my... All right, when I say find a voltage, I want you to measure it like from, like your ground point. Like, and we're going to say that the negative is, our zero voltage. So I want you to find what what voltage you'd read at A, right? I want you to find what current would be going through the 240s. So let's say this is R1, R2, and R3. Okay? All right. And then what I want is the current going through R1, the current going through R2, the current going through R3. I want the voltage at I should have used a different letter than that A, shouldn't I? But y'all know that A is not an amperage, or do you? I'll use a lowercase a from now on. What the voltage at that point would be. Okay. Y'all try it with you've got a lot of you got a lot of things in your toolbox, right? So go ahead and try. I'm gonna go ahead and change this to like a lowercase a. Okay. Just to cool. Check. I just turned on a more powerful noise suppressor so that the videos aren't as rumbly. I'm gonna watch my CPU usage just in case. While I do that, I'm gonna go and check the stream because I really do not want to. The stream because I really do not want to. The stream. Okay, then it hurt itself, and then it's. Anybody get everything yet? Okay, so we've got what's called a combination circuit now. It's not purely series and it's not purely parallel. Okay? All right. But there are pieces of it, and you can take those pieces and work the way that we've been doing. All right. So we want to figure out what our total current would be through there, and that's going to help us figure out things. But like when I've got a series and then a parallel. Like, I got to figure out what I can do. I can't add those parallel resistors to that series resistor until I figure out what they actually equal to the circuit, right? So what I do, I call it a ghost resistor. Like, so I'm going to put a little ghost resistor right here that's going to represent those two resistors. Okay, so I'll ignore those two, and then there's some resistance that's going to equal those two, right? Cool.
It's gonna be whatever that is divided by 2.
Yeah, so if I got 240 in parallel, what does that equal? 1 over 40 plus 1 over 40, and then 1 divided by that, right? So that's going to be equal to 20, right? Everybody got that? All right, so those two resistors are going to equal 20 together. And then, like, now I can add those two together. So I got a total resistance of the network, right, of 40 ohms, correct? I got 20 in series with 20, right? Cool. Everybody good? All right, so that's 40 ohms worth of resistance. So my total current that was going through here, right, was what? It's back to that 0.5 amp, correct? All right. Now that ghost resistor, that's just representing what those two parallel resistors are looking like to the circuit. The voltage source does not see anything but this point and this point, right? Like, let's say up there, like, we were trying to get exactly 500 ohms to get the current to be right. Well, we didn't have any 500 ohm resistors, so what did we do? We took three 1500 ohm resistors and put them in parallel, twisted them up, put them in there, and when you read it, it's 500 ohms. It doesn't like know, okay, well, some of it's going this way, some of it's going that way, right? All right. So those two resistors in parallel are going to equal 20 ohms together, and then that network in series with the 20 ohm resistor, right? So it'll give us 40 total ohms. So that's our total amperage. So I didn't even ask for that, but we'll, like, let's say our total current was 0.5 amps. All right. So what's the voltage drop across that top 20 ohm resistor? We got 0.5 amps across 20 ohms. What was that voltage drop? 10 volts. All right, so we got 10 volts across there. Okay. Now, we were asking for the current through R1, right? Now, when the current comes out, like, it goes this way and some of it goes this way, but then they all get back together and every bit of that current's going through there, right? So every bit of the total current is equal to the through series resistance, right? So there's nowhere else for that current to go through. So the total current is going to equal the current that's going through that first resistor, isn't it? Now, total current came here, and it's got two places it can go, and then it meets back in the middle, and it has to squeeze through that one resistor. All right, so that ghost resistor was 20 ohms, and that's going to tell us what the voltage drop across those two 40 ohm resistors was, right? So what's the voltage drop across those two 40 ohm resistors? It's going to be 10 volts also, isn't it? All right, so if we've got 10 volts and 40 ohms, how much current is going through each one of those resistors? 10 divided by 40, right? What was that? 0.25, which it makes sense that half of that half is going one direction and the other half's going the other direction because they're the same, right? Same resistance. All right, and we already found what the voltage at A would be, which was what? 10. Okay. So what's happening is coming out, it's splitting up. Now, where voltage drop was proportional in series, right? And the current stayed the same in series. Current breaks out and goes different directions in parallel. The voltage drop stays the same across that parallel network, right? But the current starts going in different directions, inversely proportional to the resistance. Okay, remember that. The bigger the resistance, the less the current's going to go through there. And it makes sense, right? All right, so let's draw this with pipe, okay? All right, so let's say we have some water pumping out. It goes through something. That's 20 ohms worth of resistance, okay? And then it goes through two things that are double the resistance, right? So that'd be half the size. But I don't know what the deal is with that. All right, so proportionally, each one of those pipe down there is half the size of that, but there's two of them. So, like, it would make sense that we are able to get the same amount of water through the two of them, correct? Like, without changing things, without changing pressure. Like, so the pressure drop that's across that one, if we go through two of them, that when you put them together, they equal, the pressure drop would be the same through those, right? All right, and then they meet back up together, and then they, go home. All right, so now when we look at that current, whatever current's going through here, the bigger the pipe, the more the fluid's going to be able to go through there, right? So if one of those was bigger than the other, it would have more current going through there. And when we're talking about bigger, we're talking about what? Conductance. And when we're adding the one over the resistance, we're adding conductance. And then when we flip it again with that one over everything, we're getting it back into terms of resistance so we can use it in the rest of our equations. All right, so every bit of that current that went into those two pipe are going to be going through this, right? So they're going to meet back up, and then, like, so your series component has the same current going through it, okay? Like, if you have a bunch of things in series, there's nowhere else for that current to go. In parallel, the current starts branching off, but your voltage stays the same across those, okay? So, life's about balance, and so is physics, okay? So, let's do another one. Mm. All right, so we'll say this is R1, R2, R3. Let's find all right, this is how we're going to start writing them. The voltage across R1, voltage across R2, voltage across R3. So the current through R1, current through R2, current through R3. Should be good for now.
Is the current over resistor 1, 2?
Do what?
Resistor 1, 2 amps. Because you don't have current, so current's X. Equation, right?
Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be 2.
No.
Mm-mm.
And the word
Do it. We'll work it together. Do it.
Question. Because I know it doesn't have resistor, it's like parallel on the bottom now. Because it's the gauge resistor. Can we put a gauge resistor in there to separate?
Yeah, the ghost resistor is just there to help you remember what the total resistance of that parallel part would be. You know, it's like, all right, if I got 300 ohms and 300 ohms together, that the network is actually seeing 150 ohm resistor, right? And that helps me, you know, with the other equations that I do, you know, so I'll add that to the series And I made my beat lab this weekend. Like, and my son got up there and he just started blasting it on the drums, and like he has no rhythm, but neither do I. Like, why won't it show up? Yeah. Like he was going crazy on them. The thing I like about electronic drums is you can turn them down. He was going to town like animal. All right, let's try this. All right, so what is those 300 ohm resistors really like when they're in parallel? They're like a 150 ohm resistor, right? All right, that 150 ohm resistor in series with that 50 ohm resistor is going to be what? 200 ohms. So, like the voltage source is only seeing like a 200 ohm resistor. Okay, it doesn't know what's going on later. So, what's the total current that's going to come out? 100 divided by 200, right? So, you'll get 0.5. Yeah. All right. So, I put the two 300s together, right? So 300 reciprocal plus 300 reciprocal, and reciprocated that. Now, if I've got two things that are the same size and I put them side by side, they're equal to one thing half that size, right? So that should make sense when we do the math, when we do the 300 reciprocal, which is 1 divided by 300, plus 300 reciprocal, then that's going to give us a total conductance, and we reciprocate that to get back to resistance. So that should be 150. I did my math right? But if I have two big pipe, put them together, it's equal to, if they're the same size, it's equal to something double their size, right? Which would be half their resistance. So I got 150, and that's going to be in series with that 50. Okay, so that should be 200, right? Did I do that right? Yes. So those two 300 were equal to 150, and that's just like being in series with that 50 ohm resistor. So 150 plus 50, we got 200. All right, now I've got 100 volts across 200 ohms. That should be half an amp, right? All right, now if we know anything about series things, like that resistor 1 is going to carry every bit of the current that we're putting out or pulling in, isn't it? So we've already got the current through R1. Let's see this. So that's some hot garbage right there. All right, so we know that R1 is going to have 0.5 amps. Now we know that R2 and R3 are going to equal half an amp if you put the two amperages together. But how much of it's going through the 300 ohms and how much of it's going through the 300 ohms? They're going to share the same amount of current, aren't they? Because they're the same size. If one was double the other size, then the one that was like smaller resistance is going to have more current going through there. And we'll do one in a minute like that. Okay? All right. So how can I do the math? Yeah.
Go ahead, I was gonna say,
How can I do the math to make sure I know what those are? I'll use that 150 ohm resistor. You okay? I can use that ghost resistor. That ghost resistor is going to dictate how much voltage drop I have across those two, right? So how much voltage drop will I have across R2 and R3? Well, we've got 0.5 amps going through an effective resistance of 150 ohms. So what would that be? 75 volts, right? Okay. So now I've got 75 volts across R2 and R3, which I can go ahead and put right there. 75 volts, 75 volts, which means how much resistance, I mean, how much voltage do I have going across the R1? 25 volts, right? You're not adding the 75s because they're the same 75, right? Like across those two resistors, that's the same 75 volts. And then you got 25 volts. So 50 times 0.5 would be 25 volts. All right, so now that I know the voltage across those resistors, I can take that 75 volts divided by 300 and have how much current? 0.25, right? So that half an amp splits up, goes two different directions, comes back together, and then goes through that. Let's do one more, but let's lopside one of those resistors on the bottom. Okay. Hmm. Let's do 100 volts again. Let's do 20 ohms again. Let's do mm, do 20 ohms right here. Let's do 40 ohms right here. Okay. I want the same stuff that I had before. So voltage across R1, voltage across R2, voltage across R3. Want current across R1, current across R2, current through R3. Sorry. Yeah, boy. because they don't think it'd be elegant enough. That's what their total thing was about not putting a calculator app on. Okay, so it's still streaming. Like, I scrolled back to see if it was matching my mouth. If it doesn't, I can't help it. Right? Doing all I can. But the screen's up. They can listen to me. Okay. So, what would that 20 and that 40 ohm resistor be? Before we do any math, what should we know? That it's going to be easier to get through there than if we just had that 20 ohm resistor on R2, right? So if we get anything when we do our math that is over 20, if we have 100 resistors and we had one resistor in that row of 100 that was 2 ohms, then that whole thing cannot be bigger than 2 ohms, right? Huh? No, because like that 2 ohms is real big and it's real easy to get things through. So by adding things beside it for it to help, it's never going to make it harder than the easiest thing to go through. Okay. So if we had a row of 50 of them and the lowest one was 5 ohms, if we get anything that's over 5 ohms, we messed up. Right.
You explain it.
Yeah. So we've got a big hallway, and we're never going to make it harder for people to get through. So at least 4 people could get through there by adding a second hallway, a third hallway, a fourth hallway. And so, like, it's always going to be easier than the easiest thing. Now, to what extent, like if we did a hallway and then a little tiny little hallway and a little tiny hallway, might not help much, but it's never going to be above. We're not making it harder for us to get through that hallway. Okay? All right, so 20 in parallel 40. I'm going to have to do my math. I know what the answer is, but I'm going to, just because I, have done this forever, but I'm going to make sure that I'm right. So I'm going to flip it over to the side. I'm going to do 20 reciprocal plus 40 reciprocal equals 0.075. That's the total conductance, right? Then I'm going to reciprocate that. Y'all get 13 and a third. All right, so like the effective resistance would be 13.3 repeating ohms. Okay. All right. So I can find my voltage drop across that 13.3 effective ohms. That ghost resistor is telling me what those two things equal as a total resistance in that network, right? So what is 100 volts divided by 13? Oh, no, we can't do that yet, can we? Let's go ahead and add that 13.3 to that 20, and we'll get 33.33333, right? What's 100 divided by 33.333? Well, 3.0003. So we're just going to say 3. All right. So we're going to have 3 amps going through there, correct? Is that right? 3 amps. All right. What do we know about that series component? That every amp that goes out has to go through there. It's getting squeezed through there, right? So my current through R1 is going to be equal to that 3 amps. Okay. What's my voltage drop across that 20 ohm resistor? We got 20 ohms with 3 amps going through it. Ohm's law, remember, E over IR. We've got a current and a resistor, 20 times 3, right? Correct? So we're going to have 60 volts across that 20 ohm resistor, right? All right, what's 13.3 repeating times 3? 39.999, 40 volts, right? So across that 13.3 ohm resistor, like that ghost resistor in the middle, is telling us that we've got 40 volts across there. All right. So now we got 40 volts across a 20 ohm resistor. How much current is going through there? 40 divided by 20. 2. 40 divided by 40 ohms. How much current is going through that 1 amp? And it makes sense. We got 3 total amps. 2 of it's going this way, 1 of it's going this way, right? And it makes sense because this is half as hard to get stuff through as this one is, okay? So it is inversely proportional to the resistance because resistance is fighting us, okay? So the bigger the resistance, the less the current is going to be able to get through, okay? All right, so we want to talk about something because I want y'all to be able to dig through those big old piles of resistors and put together some networks, right? I want to have one thing that we need to do though. I want y'all to find resistor color code and find a good picture to remember, okay? Come on, yo. All right.
Page 111.
Page 111. Like, there's apps you can get that'll help you. Like back in the day, they forced us to memorize this, right? Now, you need to know it in general. Come on, yo. All right, so I'm just going to have to go from here. All right, so a lot of times you'll have 4 or 5 bands. All right, so I'm going to tell y'all something that's going to blow your mind. You know there's no such thing as brown. Brown is not on the color wheel. Brown is an orange, but a certain shade of orange that we all associate with as being brown. Like brown is contextual. Like if you look behind there and look at that wood right there, it's an orange color, but you conceptualize it as being a separate orange that we call brown. So know that?
What about that orange one, extension board?
Do it.
What about the orange one?
Orange is the real color. Brown's not.
Okay.
Right. Like, brown is a mixture of a bunch of colors. Right, but it's not a color of itself. Right. All right, so we got brown. Like this resistor's got brown. It's got black. It's got red. And it's got gold, which we're going to use. Gold's a hard color to, well, it's more peach, but we're going to call that gold. Okay. All right. So either pull it up in your book, what page you say it was, 110, 111, or pull it up on the internet. All right. There's a pretty a logical thing about it. All right, so we're going to say that 0 actually needs to be taken care of. All right, so if you see a black, think of it as, a 0. Okay, and then we go to brown. We'll say that's a 1. Okay. So that takes out most of our not in the color wheel type things. Okay. And then we start going with what's next? Red. Right? What's next? It goes from red to yellow? Orange. Alright, so I want to get a more orangey orange. That ain't it. It's too red. Good night. Now that I mentioned that brown looks like orange, y'all can't get it out of your head, can you? Alright. Brown's a dirtier orange, okay? Alright, then what? Yellow, right? And it's going to keep going through the colors of the rainbow. So Roy G. Biv, right? So you got yellow, green, blue, violet. And then if we get into really funky stuff, like we use silver for 8, and then white, which you're not going to be able to see, for 9. I don't know how I'm going to. I'm going to put a black mark here. And then I'm going to put a white. No. Cool. All right. Your last band is what's called tolerance. All right. In the real world, things aren't always just perfectly equal. Like, when we're dealing with engineering, we're not really dealing with really precise things a whole lot unless you're building a bridge. Now that I put this on the internet as public, I'm scared that I'm going to get a nasty phone call, but I never was afraid of flying until I had a aerospace engineer as my roommate, and now I'm terrified of it. But
What they tell you?
well, just they're designing things that put people in the air, and that terrifies me. I would be one of those people. So I'm sorry if you're watching this. All right. But like in the vast majority of things, if I'm not building bridges or I'm not building whatever, we're talking about big proportions. Like in electronics, like unless I'm doing like a really high frequency, high tolerance type thing, there's not too big of a difference between like 1K ohm and 1.2K ohms, even though that's like 200 ohms. Okay. So we have what's called tolerance. And if we need to like be real tight, like that has to be exactly 500 ohms, then we'll pay money to get a high tolerance so that like, when I put that resistor in, I know that it's within like, 1 or 2 ohms of the stuff. We're going to have to make sure to keep wearing masks, right? Like, I don't want us to,
Mine's just drainage.
well, but that kind of puts things in perspective, right? Like, I'm far enough away, I'm not going to get it, but I don't want y'all getting it. So I don't even know if I spelled tolerance right. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not a speller. All right, so that's going to tell us how close we can expect those resistors. When we build resistors, we mix up a mixture that's going to give us around that amount of resistance. We put it in, and then we measure, and then we paint them. Like, so if a batch of them are like within 10% of whatever we wanted, then we'll just put a 10% tolerance band on there. Okay. If they're really close to being like exactly 500 and we're trying to make 500, we'll put a tight tolerance band and charge double or triple what it costs to buy a lesser tolerance. Okay. Unless you're getting into really, really, really like high frequency things, which, a little variance is going to change a big variance of your frequency. Usually you're going to be able to get by with like a 10 or a 5% resistor. That means that it's within 10% of whatever the value is that we say it is. Okay. So what's 10% of 500? 50. Right, so that means that it's between 450 and 550. Right? All right. So now ignore the tolerance band for right now. Okay? The next to the last thing is going to be a multiplier. Okay? So in a four band, the third band is a multiplier. That's the most important band because that's going to dictate, like, if the first two colors are slightly different, that's not that big of a jump. The difference between having 4 zeros at the end and 3 zeros at the end is very important, right? So that last band next to the tolerance band is going to be a multiplier, okay? And you can think of it as how many zeros past the other two, okay? Cool. And then the other two bands are just numbers. Okay. So what is this resistor? We got a brown, so we got a 1. We got a black, so we've got a 0, and then we've got a red, which is multiplied times 100, right? Like, so just think of that as how many zeros. Okay. So we got a red, so boom, boom. We got 2 zeros after that. Okay. So that is a 1K, and we need to get used to, like, when we're using big numbers or small numbers, start using multipliers to help with this, because once we start getting to like 1 meg, that's a lot of zeros to forget. Like, if you miss 1 0, that's the difference between 1 million and 100,000, right? All right, so I've got a 1K on for this 1,000. All right, this multimeter right here is not for general use. Okay, like, it's a little Chinese knockoff copy that it does say. It doesn't even have a category rating on it. Okay, so it's a legal gray area where, like, Harbor Freight, you could probably sue them, but they're getting really cheap component. I would not put this on something that could blow me up.
Don't buy Harbor Freight.
Don't buy meters that don't have a category rating. Okay.
What category do you want?
It depends on what you're working on. So, usually you'll see something like category rated at 3 for 600 volts, or 1,000 volts, and then 4 for 600 volts. That's how much it can take worth of that's how much it can take before it becomes a hand grenade. Okay. So now it can take more than that, but you don't know how much more. So you don't. So, like, category 4 would be on the other side of your meter. Category 3, like, would be on this side of your box. So a category 3 at 600 you could work in the house with. But all right, so I measured about like 1100, or yeah, like 1090 or so, which was within the tolerance of that. What's 10? Yeah, but it was acting squirrely. One of the problems when you're measuring with the meter is when you're holding it like this, that you have some amount of resistance. Okay. Yeah, so you're in parallel with that. Even though you're a lot of resistance, that's still going to affect the total resistance that you read across. So 1K ohm within 10%, that's within 100 things of it, right? All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to take some of those resistors and you're going to make a voltage divider. Okay. I want you to be able to do it in every circuit, right? And then I want you to be able to do it in real life. Okay. So, with every circuit, you didn't have to use a breadboard in there. What a breadboard is a device that you I don't know why it's not letting me get out on the network. What I can do though, I can show you here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a picture of this. Now bear with me. All right. And then I'm going to use that photo. Look at me. All right. So
Breadboard.
that's breadboard. They call it breadboard because back in the day, like when you didn't want to solder stuff, you would take a breadboard, like a piece of wood, and you would hammer nails into it, and then you would tie your components to those nails, and then you could go. We don't want to solder a bunch of stuff up and then have to take it apart, so it's a really good prototyping thing. Okay? All right. Inside of here, there are little springs. Okay? And they're connected in row. Well, they're clips. Okay, so like, you see this row right here? Those 5 holes are all connected. On the inside, there's a little clip, and when you put something in one hole, it's connected to anything you put in the other holes. Okay, so that's connected to each other. Those 5 holes are connected to each other, but they are not connected to these 5 holes. Okay, and they're not connected to these 5 holes right here. So anything I want connected, I would put, let's say I have a resistor that I want connected to another resistor. I would put them in the same row. Okay. When it's sideways like that, it's a column, but you get the point, right? Let me make it so that it's not as visible. So those 5 things are connected. So I could have a resistor that's going to be connected to another resistor, right? By putting them in the same thing. This would be like a node here, you know, so a big circle. That's not as pretty as I thought it was going to be. All right. So if I want to take a resistor and tie it to another resistor, I would put it in one hole. I'd put it in a different hole, like a different row. And then, so this right here is going to connect those 2 resistors. Okay. Cool. If I don't have them in the same row, they're not connected together. All right. So what I can do is I can have a wire coming in, let's say from the power supply. I could go into one row, and then I'd come out of that row with the resistor, and then I'd go into another row, and then it doesn't matter what row, as long as it's the same row, and then I connect another resistor to that row and go on, and then I could have at the end of that going back to the power supply or something. Okay? Cool. Everybody follow? Now, there's 4 special rows across the top up here. Like, where there's only 5 holes that are connected right here, right? There's a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 50 holes across the top that are all connected. There's 50 holes across the second row that's all connected, right? All of those holes are all connected. They do that because there's a lot of times that we need a lot of things connected to 1 or 2 things, namely what we call our like power bus. Okay, there's a lot of things that need that power. Okay, and so we have holes. Now they've got a little red thing with the positive. I would suggest using that. Right, that. There's nothing magical about that row right there that makes it positive. But it's got an indicator, so we're going to use it, right? Now, most breadboards have, a busway, 2 busways on either side of there, okay? Usually I'll use a top of what I'm using to have, like, my power coming in, and then, like, other things down on this one. Doesn't matter. Now, that positive and that positive are not connected together. So if you want it to be connected, you're going to have to put a wire between, 2 points on there. Okay? So we could take a wire and connect that top and that second to the top. Or y'all see what I did there, right? I'd put a wire there, and then all of those would be connected. Like the red to the red and the black to the black. Okay. All right. So y'all are going to make a voltage divider. Okay. You'll use a power supply. You see the little beige things back there? Actually, we're not going to use those. What we're going to use is to be honest with you, we'll probably use a battery. Okay. Now, when you make these voltage dividers, the only thing it's actually doing is generating heat. Right? That's the only way it can dump that voltage down is by generating heat. So we'll use real resistors and a battery, and then you'll take the voltmeter and you'll measure that you're getting the voltage out that you think you should. Okay? So be ready for that. Like I'll put something up that will be a couple of circuits that I want you to build in every circuit to verify how they should work, right? And then you're going to go and you're going to take the breadboard and you're going to try to make it work on the breadboard, okay? Like you'll take that resistor and put it in holes like booyah, booyah. Not too bad.
It's really tiny.
Really tiny. All right. So get excited. We're about to do some real world stuff. Okay. We're going to take that battery and then we're going to be able to output different voltages. All right. Any questions? Have fun evening. Yeah.
When you were talking about the term being written, you were talking about